In today's video, we're going to take a look at a clip from Ricky Gervais, which was posted on a Twitter account devoted to Ricky Gervais clips. This one's nice because it's about a minute and a half of Gervais talking about religion, yeah, in his typical way, quite dismissive, caustic. Now, I'd want to begin by saying that I think Ricky Gervais is a great comedian. I'm a great admirer of his. I first watched The Office, the original British UK Office. So it must be about 20 years ago now. Seen it several times. I think it's a great series. I enjoyed it so much that I was forever prejudiced against the American Office when it came out, and I did watch one or two episodes of that one, but I just could never get into it because I always thought of the original Office. I also loved Ricky in Extras. That's a wonderful series. I really enjoyed him in Derek. Um, and the Afterlife series. I didn't watch all that one. It was pretty good. And I've enjoyed, for the most part, his comedy specials as well. He obviously is very intentional about pushing buttons and being as offensive as he can, but not just because he's like a nihilist or something, but rather because he wants to make what he believes to be serious, ethical, and philosophical points about the nature of comedy in a free society and how you deal with existential situations in life by laughing at them. And I appreciate a lot of what he has to say there. And I especially appreciate his concern for animal welfare and his compassion for animals and how he challenges people and makes a big deal about that within his comedy as well. So while some people are very much not Ricky Gervais fans, I am, and I come to this as a Ricky Gervais fan. And I want to say I'm somewhat sympathetic with some of the things he's going to say here, but I also want to use this as an opportunity to offer some critique. So let's take a look. Okay, there are probably around 20 to 25-second chunks in this video. And want to watch the first one, offer a bit of a debrief, and then go on to the next one from there.
I think the myths came up, maybe, often as a stopgap to knowledge until we find out more. The Earth is flat. No, we've proved now. Okay, the Earth's not flat. We were wrong. Okay, but that's not personal. You don't take that personally. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your afterlife. And so they often want to hold on to that, right? But only because of the way they've been conditioned. We know it's fun to tell children there's a Santa Claus, and there's fairies at the bottom of the garden, and all these cute things. It's cute till they're 7 or 8. If they're 34, it's a bit embarrassing socially. This is my son. What's he doing? He's looking for fairies. Is he?
Okay, so that's the first one. Let's debrief then. First thing that Ricky Gervais briefly talked about here is an approach to theism that is God of the gaps, where God was invoked simply as an explanatory cause when we did not have access to any other explanatory causes. And of course, there's a long history of discussion and limitations of God of the gap as an approach to knowledge and explanation. At a more sophisticated level, I would say Thomas Nagel, a philosopher of religion and an atheist, said it very well when and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said essentially that theism or appeal to God is a placeholder when we don't have an explanation. And I thought that's a good way to put it. Now, I would just say that in terms of, first of all, let me say this, that the deeper issue here, or one of the deeper issues at least, is the distinction between efficient causal explanations and agent causal explanations. An efficient causal explanation, let's say if you heard a loud bang, would be to simply look for some prior cause that obtained, and simply in virtue of the laws of nature and that cause was sufficient to bring about the effect of the bang. So whether that's right in the neighborhood you hear a bang, or in the universe or whatever you hear a bang. But there are also agent causal explanations, and an agent causal explanation is one that appeals to an agent. So it says an agent is part of the story, or the intentional actions of a person are part of the story of how one explains this. And you could have layered levels of explanation. So you could have efficient causal explanations and also agent causal explanation for the same event. Let's say that the tea kettle starts whistling because boiling water's boiling within it, and you say, why is the tea kettle whistling? One explanation is because of the vibration of the water molecules due to heat. Another explanation is because I want to have tea. Those are different explanations. One of them is appealing to an efficient causal explanation, the other one to an agent causal explanation, and they can be layered. When we look at the world around us, we are often appealing to agent causal explanations. We're often appealing to efficient causal explanations. And we have to be, it would be absurd to conclude in principle that ever appealing to an agent causal explanation is always a, an inappropriate appeal to gaps and just a placeholder when we lack an efficient causal explanation, because it seems to me that agent causal explanations are a part of the story of the universe around us. When we come to the concept of God, part of the story of the concept of God as an agent causal explanation for the world around us is that there may be aspects of reality that are attributable to agent causes, but which are not attributable to any finite agent causes that exist simply within nature. And so that's the appeal to a supernatural agent causal explanation or to a theistic causal explanation. Whether you agree with such explanations or not, the point I want to make then is that they're not in principle absurd or inappropriate or appeals to ignorance. When Gervais refers to the 34-year-old looking for fairies or believing in Santa Claus, I mean, he's kind of just ripping that off, right, from Richard Dawkins, particularly, I think, in the second edition of The God Delusion, where he refers to his critics that say he doesn't know he knows very little about areas like philosophical theology and philosophy of religion as disciplines, as fields of inquiry. And he says, well, I also don't know anything about fairyology. It doesn't mean that I have to study fairies in order to say it's nonsense. And you get that kind of same vibe, of course, here from Ricky. Now, because he's Ricky Gervais, he kind of tells it in a he's very effective in his delivery, in his comedic delivery, talking about a 34-year-old looking for fairies, and we're all kind of like, okay, yeah, how's that going for you? But of course, one of the things here is that really is it's Ricky Gervais as a naturalist, atheist, someone who doesn't believe there is any supernatural realm or anything beyond the scope of, I guess, what is studied by the natural sciences. I mean, I'm not sure how Ricky Gervais defines naturalism. That, of course, is an ongoing conversation among self-described naturalists. There is as much debate and dialogue about how to define naturalism as a view as there is about how to define theism as a view. So I'm not sure what kind of naturalist Ricky Gervais is, but it's clear that he looks at the world through a naturalistic prism, or he appeals to or evaluates the prima facie credibility, or as William James would have said, whether a particular view is a live option for belief. He views all of that through the plausibility framework of a naturalist worldview, whatever his naturalism may be. And from that perspective, he derides Santa Claus or theism as Santa Claus, which is by implication a sort of arrested intellectual development. So people never grew up in some area of their lives. They continue to be infantilized, to have a sort of Linus security blanket at a galactic or metaphysical level to deal with the existential enemy or the meaninglessness of existence or something like that. They hold on to God like a child going into adulthood holds on to Santa Claus. Now, I mean, again, it seems to me this is simply Ricky Gervais speaking in a dismissive tone from the perspective of someone within some sort of naturalistic plausibility framework. And so, really, all that does, it doesn't actually tell us anything about theists or whether their views are credible or not. All it does is say they don't look credible from the perspective of somebody who holds this very different plausibility framework. Now, one more thing I would note here where there is an obvious difference between a 34-year-old looking for fairies or believing in Santa Claus versus God is 90% of the global population are some kind of theists or some kind of supernaturalists. They believe there is something else beyond nature, and it may well be north of 90%. But not only that, they're also very much represented across the socioeconomic spectrum and across an educational spectrum and a social spectrum and various other spectra. So, for example, at my church, I mean, I have a terminal degree in theology. I recognize that Ricky Gervais wouldn't respect that, but there is someone who was on. His name is Axel Holleen, on who goes to my church, and I've talked about him before. And he was on a committee, I think about 10 years ago now, that won the Nobel Prize for Physics, and he works in the area of dark matter. In fact, I talked to him at church a couple of weeks ago, and he said he was just getting ready to travel to Italy to work on dark matter in Italy. And I'll tell you this, Axel Holleen does not have a Santa Claus view of God. Um, he's not an infantilized 34-year-old looking for fairies in the garden. These are theists like Axel Holleen, or many, many, many millions, frankly, of other people like this who have achieved the highest level, the terminal degrees and in their fields of expertise are nonetheless deeply nuanced and devout theists. So what Ricky Gervais is doing here is really just sort of falsely projecting the infantilized beliefs of one group of people and children and thinking that is an accurate representation of the theism or the agent causal explanatory worldview of millions of people, which it just isn't. So again, that tells us more about Ricky Gervais than it tells us about these people. Okay, let's return to the video, and next we're going to watch what he has to say about a common objection to theism and to Christianity, which is that theistic beliefs really map onto the geographic regions, to particular geographic regions. So if you're born in India, you're more likely to be a Hindu. If you're born in Kentucky, you're more likely to be a Baptist, that kind of thing. Let's take a look at that and then again debrief it.
Okay, we better leave. If you're born in India, you're probably a Hindu. If you're born in America, you're probably a Christian. If you're born in Pakistan, you're probably a Muslim. That's a coincidence, isn't it? That you're always born into the right God. Always, isn't that lucky? I was born into the right God. All those others are going to hell. But I was born into the right religion. I'm going to heaven. It's strange that...
Okay, this one we want to separate a couple different things. So there's not a formal argument here, but one can see there's an implied argument in what Gervais is saying. I think we could interpret it as an undercutting defeater. So what's an undercutting defeater? An undercutting defeater it doesn't show that something is false, but it removes one's ground to believe it is true. In contrast, a rebutting defeater shows or gives reason to think something is false. For example, let's say that you believe the couch in the living room that you just looked into, the couch is red. And a rebutting defeater would be to bring you back into the room and show, in fact, no, the couch is not red, it's white. That would be a rebutting defeater. It would show that it is false to believe the couch is red, or this is evidence that the couch is not, in fact, red as you believed. But an undercutting defeater might say, well, the reason you believe the couch is red is because there was a red light illuminating the room and making the furniture look red. Now, that doesn't tell you that the couch is not red, because the couch could be red and illuminated in red light. But what that does do is it undercuts your ground to believe the couch is red. It undercuts it by saying everything is illuminated in red light and so looks red. So it may still be the case that the couch is red, but you've now had your grounds to believe it is red undercut. And Gervais on this view is saying, you all think that you can just be a Hindu when you were born in India or a Christian when you were born in the United States, but I'm going to undercut your basis to think that Hinduism is true or that Christianity is true. And this is the reason why you should undercut that, because everybody just adopts the religion in the world, or is likely to adopt the religion in the part of the world in which they were born. And that undercuts it. Now, my first response is to say that if this proves anything, it proves too much, because it would essentially be Ricky Gervais sawing off the branch that he's sitting on. think about it like this. If you were born into England in the 1860s, it's likely that you would be a Christian ultimately. But if you're born into England in the 1960s, I haven't looked Gervais's age up, but I assume he was born probably in the early to mid 60s. If you're born in that time into England, the likelihood is that you're really going to be not religiously committed at all. Because current rates of belief of even belief in God in England are very low. Church attendance on Sunday morning is 5%. So if you're born into England today, likelihood is that you'll be a skeptic with views broadly like that which Gervais holds. So if being born and becoming a Christian because you were born into America or becoming a Hindu when you were born into India is an argument to be skeptical of Christianity or Hinduism, then likewise, for that reason, being born into England and predisposed to be a naturalist or a skeptic like Ricky Gervais is undercuts that as well. Now, you could also become much more fine-grained about this. It's not just about being born into a geographic region or country, it's about which part of the country are you born into, right? Are you born into the deep south in the United States, or are you born into New England where rates of religiosity are much lower? What kind of family were you born into? Right? Or were your parents religious? Because you could have religious parents in England, or you could have irreligious parents in the deep south. And again, that's going to affect things. So all sorts of things you can consider for how we are the products of our social formation, and we form beliefs through social formation. This applies to our views of the natural world, no less than the supernatural world, by the way. For example, you could say to Ricky Gervais, "Oh, if you were born into uh, the pre-Newtonian world, Europe in the early 17th century, you would have had different views of the nature of the world and how things are held together than being born into a post-Newtonian world or a post-Einsteinian world." Each one of us is going to likely adopt the understanding of nature, the natural world that is currently held in the time and place in which we are raised and socialized. Does that mean that we have now a basis or grounds to be generally skeptical of views of nature or the natural world around us? No, it doesn't. It just means everybody is going to be socialized in some way. None of us stands beyond or outside of the social formation or the forces that form us socially and by which we come to adopt beliefs and form a worldview. And Ricky Gervais is no different than anybody else in that. Now, the one thing I think that where Ricky Gervais goes beyond that kind of sawing off the branch he's sitting on and actually makes a point that is targeting theism in particular is when he says everybody who doesn't hold my view is going to hell. That's a different issue. And that is an issue that doesn't apply to naturalists like Gervais, but would apply to theists who believe in a benevolent, providential God. Because then you have the situation, well, if you're more likely to be a Christian, let's say Christianity is true for the sake of argument, and you're more likely to be a Christian if you're born into America than into India or England in the 21st century, then it seems like God is preferencing the people born into America to be more likely to become Christian and so be saved than people in India or in England. And that seems to be an argument against the existence of that God if God is considered to be a perfectly loving, omnibenevolent God that wants to give everybody the same opportunity of salvation that everybody else has. And the only thing I would say in response to that is that's not a problem with theism per se, nor is it even a problem with Christianity per se. That's a problem with a particular understanding of soteriology or a doctrine or understanding of salvation, which requires this kind of cognitive assent to doctrine in order to be saved. And there are all sorts of reasons why one would be skeptical or could be skeptical of that view. For example, in Romans chapter 2, the Apostle Paul says quite explicitly that whether you are Jew or a Gentile, you are judged on the light that you've been given. Jews at the time that Paul was writing were understood to have a fuller revelation of the divine in terms of having received the law than the Gentile who had not received that. But this did not necessarily place the Gentile at a disadvantage because the person who had received a fuller revelation was held accountable for the fuller information that they had received. And that's what Paul says in Romans 2. So each person is judged based upon the light that they've been given, and God judges everybody justly and fairly. And so to extrapolate from that, a person could infer that if you were born in India and never had access to the doctrines offered, um, taught by Christianity, which on this scenario are true, that doesn't mean God necessarily holds that against you if you never had an opportunity with those doctrines. So this isn't an issue against Christianity per se, but just against a particular understanding of salvation. Okay, now we're going to look to the last section, and then we'll wrap this up.
We hold on to these sort of medieval beliefs. You know, where did the universe come from? God made it, which doesn't solve the problem for me, because we straight away say, well, who made God? And if they say, well, he's always been around, well, let's just say the universe has then. Let's just cut out the middleman. It saves time.
Okay, that's it. That's the end of the clip. And I wanted to show that last bit. That's Ricky Gervais essentially offering his rebuttal to 2,500 years of cosmological arguments, dating back to the ancient Greeks on through the Christian and deist and Muslim traditions on down to today, where this argument in a multiplicity of forms and different sub-arguments is still argued and defended and critiqued in the highest echelons of academic philosophy. The thing I just want to note here is that Gervais's response here is a very common one, kind of like it says, essentially the argument is like, well, everything needs a cause. Well, then God needs a cause. Well, if God doesn't need a cause, then the universe doesn't need a cause. Now I've just rebutted the entire cosmological argument. And that's not true. There are multiple arguments that are not subject to this kind of quick rebuttal. But what this does illustrate, and I want to nuance this, but I do want to say that I think Ricky Gervais here is simply illustrating the Dunning-Kruger effect, where person that the less that they know about a particular subject matter, the more likely they are to overestimate their knowledge of and mastery of the subject matter. And so Ricky Gervais clearly has, like Richard Dawkins, a very negligible grasp of the philosophical issues that are at play in a cosmological argument, debate, or discussion. And he just doesn't grasp what he doesn't grasp. And he overestimates his mastery here and believes he can rebut an argument because it seems absurd to him, because he thinks he has this quick rebuttal to it. And I think we really, in particular, here's a caution for all of us, that we have to be very careful about the Dunning-Kruger effect affecting us adversely when we are contemptuous of opposing views because they're simply far outside of our currently held plausibility framework. That's a lesson for all of us. So Gervais, I think it's fair to say, is contemptuous of theists and Christians. He believes that their beliefs are the result of some sort of infantilization where they never grew up intellectually and they continue to appeal to intellectually indefensible views of the world. And so he's contemptuous of it and then quickly dismisses arguments in defense of that position. And I think that that is a danger for all of us. We can all be contemptuous and dismissive of opposing views that are far outside of our plausibility frameworks. And we likewise should be careful not to allow ourselves to be subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect and thus to become quickly dismissive of opposing views in a way that does not undercut those views, but simply undercuts our own position and our ability to articulate our own position in a winsome, sophisticated, and nuanced way that is in keeping with the golden rule to treat the views of other people the way that you would want your own views to be treated. That is, have them engaged with in a sophisticated, charitable way rather than dismissed and strawmanned.